Hey guys, I just want to bring up an opportunity for resource investors. If you want to rub elbows with the big wigs and talk to companies directly that are handpicked by Rick Rule, well, you got to be in Boca Raton from July 7th to 11th for the Rick Rule Symposium. The event has become a premier event in the mining space, and they're going to have some pretty big speakers like Robert Friedland, Sean Ruzin, and the great Rick Rule. And also, we're going to be there. You can meet the Deep Dive team in person. So if you're interested in rubbing elbow with some of the biggest heavy hitters in junior mining, check out the link below. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're chatting copper with Lau from crisisinvesting.com. We discuss what's happening right now in terms of copper demand. We get into the shortages that are going to exist as a result of a lack of copper mines going into production. And Lau gives us a sense of where he thinks copper investors should be placing their bets given the current macro environment. All right, everybody, enjoy the interview. Lau, thanks so much for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
So today we are going to be talking about copper. One of the big themes, I think, right now that's going around. We obviously see all the quotes by Goldman Sachs talking about how copper is the new oil, and how we're going to need a ton of copper to basically power the world if we want to meet these sort of net zero targets. Lau, what's got you excited about copper?
Well, all those quotes that you mentioned, right, floating around, that's definitely part of the reason, I guess, especially when you talk from perspective of a regular reader, for example. There's this one by Robert Friedland, right? This is the guy who's the founder of the Ivanhoe mining empire, and a good friend of Doug's also, of Doug Casey's, and one of the important voices in the mining industry. So he said that we'll probably need as much copper in the next 25 years as we've mined in the last 10,000 years. So that must have struck a chord with some people, and it definitely has with me. So I guess, so just the question, would probably be why so much copper and so soon? Because 20 and 25 years is just, it's a relatively short period. And the simple answer to that is just actually, it's a one-word answer, is electrification. And like you said, like most people, when they think about electrification, they tend to think about things like, EVs, wind turbines, all
panels.
Sorry?
Solar panels,
exactly. All the things that sort of come bundled up with this push by the Western governments to electrify the world by 2050, right? Because that's net zero target for them. They call it the green energy transition. They call it net zero, but I think that's just one part of the coin. And I mean, whatever you think about this sort of push by the Western governments, you cannot really deny that it's happening. Yes, the ideology driving it may be, misplaced. It may not be understandable to us, the free market types. But it's happening, and the truth of the matter is that the West is going to need a lot of copper, right? But there's also another side to the story, and I think that's the bigger one, and that's the electrification of the developing world. And it's funny that pundits, they conveniently choose to ignore it, because I guess part of the reason behind that is that it doesn't really fit with their decarbonization narrative. The fact that we need to have we need to have fewer people living on the planet. And the truth of the matter is that you still have around 1 billion people who don't have access to primary electricity, right? Then on top of that, you have another 2 billion people that don't have access to reliable or affordable electricity. So, and that's to me, that's the most important side of the whole electrification debate, right? So basically, electrifying that part of the world, the developing world, and you can sort of draw the parallel here with what urbanization and capitalism did in China. When they lifted millions of people out of poverty, and 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 along with that, you also had this huge natural resources bull market that happened between the year 2000 and 2010. So we are sitting somewhere in the middle of that, basically. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah. So I hear about copper, and we've seen a little bit of a run in the price of copper over the last year. And one of the things that I think about is how, when I look at some of the big copper projects in the world, whether we're talking about Cobre Panama, that was owned by First Quantum, and I can think of various other ones that were basically not allowed to go to production due to environmental concerns or issues with the local communities. And then you think about all this demand that we have that is coming online, and you can't help but wonder what's going to happen in 5 years as the deficits grow and grow and grow. Do you have any thoughts of where the price of copper could be heading? Because from my view, if we don't have large copper projects going into production, and to Robert Friedland's quote, we effectively need 3 major copper mines to go into production every single year in order to meet the electrification needs. What happens in 5 years if we don't get more copper projects online?
That's a great question, and it's actually not an easy one to answer. I think we are going to have a bull market of colossal proportions in copper, right? And the reason I say that, let me back up a little bit. There is this study by the International Energy Forum, right? And you sort of touch upon that slightly, but I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on that. And it's actually one of the most quoted studies out there, and also, to my mind, one of the more conservative, which is the reason why I like talking about it. So basically, the study looked into how much copper would need by the year 2050, and the reason, obviously, they picked that year because that's like the net zero year and all that stuff that gets talked about so much. So, and they looked into 5 different scenarios: so baseline, EVs, and EV plus grid, and net zero, right? So those 5 scenarios, and they discovered that just under the baseline scenario would need 37 million metric tons of copper per year by the year 2050, right? So that's just looking where we are right now. So I think in that particular study they were referencing the year 2018 as their starting point, and back then we were producing around 20 million metric tons of copper. Now I think we are up to 22 million metric tons of copper, but that's still like 70% decrease. And we are talking about annual production, right? So that's 70% increase from the levels that we are producing copper right now. And we would have to have that every year by the time the year 2050 rolls around. So taken together, that's also an interesting part. And that's probably, you mentioned that Robert Friedland said something about 3 mines coming online. Yeah. So that's definitely one of the reasons. So taken together, that also means that over the next 3 decades, right, the world will need about 1 billion metric tons of copper. Oh, that's a lot of copper. But I have to remind you that we're only talking about the baseline scenario here. The baseline scenario basically just means we're going to meet our current copper needs and also electrify the developing world. It doesn't include any of the green energy transition stuff. All this stuff goes under the other scenarios, right? So that's 1 billion just from that. And this sort of brings me back to the Robert Friedland's words that I highlighted earlier, right? So that amount, 1 billion metric tons, is around 25% more copper than has been mined in all of human history, which is about 800 million metric tons. So, so that's basically, we are basically talking, and again, under this baseline scenario, we're basically talking one large mine coming online every single year by the year 2050.
So my question that I'm wondering, when I look at what's happened with the price of copper, and I look at a lot of the copper juniors that I see, and to even quote one recent story, which is Adventus, who had a very interesting high grade project in Ecuador that nobody wanted to finance. I can't help but wonder if or what it's going to take to get capitals to start to flow into a bunch of these copper juniors, because there's a whole bunch of them that are public. Maybe the projects just aren't good enough. I don't know. But what do you think it's going to take for us to start to see the recent gains that have happened in the copper price to actually spill over into the juniors and explorers?
This is a great question. It's actually a very difficult situation because you have to consider that it takes between 15 and 20 years, right? Between the time that you discover a new copper mineral deposit and building a mine. So, and like you touched upon, we are actually, the copper market is currently in a low capital cycle, right? Which is the reason behind all those things that mentioned, right? So what it means is that, miners, they are not really investing, right? So if you look at their capex, at the capital expenditures, capex, right, it's down around 60% from around 10 years ago, I think. And that tells you something, because we just weren't, we just were 10 years ago, we weren't where we are now in terms of electrification and all that stuff, and in terms of all the green energy stuff and all that stuff. And now we've cut that capex by almost 60%. So, but the thing is that, like I said, it takes about 20 years to bring a deposit. Obviously, you have to find it first to bring it online. So this, even if the capex numbers improve, right, this situation won't change. Like it will take quite a while. And you also, and so under the base, going back to the scenarios, right? So one mine under the baseline scenario, right? And when I said one large mine, I'm basically mean a mine that produces north of 500,000 tons of copper. So, and if you look like at the recent history, I think between the year 2017 and 2023, we only had like 4 major copper mines that were brought online. And one of them actually was Cobre Panama, which you mentioned. And it was actually shut down last year.
Yeah. It's crazy when you think about it, because Cobre Panama was going to make up 10% of Ecuador's GDP. Yeah. And that wasn't enough for them to want to move forward with the project. And Ecuador is it's not Canada or the US. It's a country that you would think would want those dollars to flow in. And when I see that what's happened, my take on it is that what really needs to happen is we need a materially higher price of copper to get projects like that on board. If 10% of GDP won't do it, maybe 20%, maybe 30% does it, 40%. And that means that copper could go to, $15 a pound, $20 a pound. And it sounds crazy to say it, but if no projects are coming online and demand is only going to skyrocket from here, something has to give. And that's sort of my viewpoint on it. Have you come out with any sort of estimates or forecasts for where you think the price of copper could be heading over the near term?
No, we haven't really, because it's like you said, nothing is basically, you cannot exclude any kind of scenario. When you look at numbers like that, when you need one large mine in order just to meet the baseline scenario, right? And we're not talking even about all the energy transition stuff, right? I think that their study, the study that I mentioned earlier by the International Energy Forum, I think they found that in order for us to meet the EV plus grid scenario, we'd need 2 mines. And we're talking about net zero. We're talking about 6 mines, each producing 500,000 metric tons of copper. So that's just like crazy. When you consider that, in the last 5 years, we only had in the last 6 years, we only had 4 of these mines come online, and they weren't even that large. I think most of them weren't producing that many that many metric tons. And one of them is already offline. And it's, when I read, what the newspapers in Panama, it doesn't seem like it will be going back online anytime soon. So now you have this huge mine, and that's another thing, right? So from the perspective of an investor, right? So when you look at this, right, and you see this 10 billion copper mine just now sitting idle in the jungle, right? I mean, how does that make you feel? Do you feel encouraged about making these sorts of investments in countries like that? Or are you thinking, oh my God, I probably, I should probably let some other guy, go in and
it totally messes up the investment capital flows into the entire arena. How like if the developers can't get past the finish line to get to production, then why is anybody going to invest in the explorers? Because what are we playing for? What are the stakes here? If an explorer becomes a developer and they can't get beyond being a developer, then what's the point? What's the point of putting my capital in harm's way? And to me, it feels like when I look at it, and sorry if I sound circular or a broken record, but we need materially higher prices of copper to get capital to start to flow in and have communities say, you know what? We didn't like to have that copper mine in production in our country or neighborhood, but you know what? All those bags of cash you're about to throw at us makes us feel a little bit better about it. And make no mistake, we need it, or else our world's going to shut down. We're never going to meet these electrification goals, and that's just kind of where I see it heading. What, Lau? Do you cover any copper stories that you're bullish on that you could talk about, or do you kind of just cover it from a macro standpoint?
We do cover certain copper stories, but I wouldn't really want to go in detail because we are talking like very small explorers, that basically, like Doug likes to say, burning matches and things like that. So, but if I can touch upon something that you just mentioned, where you said that it basically messes up, with the way investors would normally view this sort of thing, right? So you have to keep in mind that Cobre Panama, they actually had the deal, right? They actually had the deal with the Panamanian government, right? The Panamanian government had already given them the 20-year mining permit, right? Obviously, they in exchange the company, had agreed to pay the government around, what was it, like 400 million yearly, something like that. But the Panamanians said, yeah, okay, let's do it, But then, the news about the deal broke, and you had, all these people marching in the streets, protesting. Obviously, they're saying that they are worried about the mine's impact on environment and water supply, which is, water supply is kind of understandable in that part of the world. And they managed to shut down the mine for weeks. And then it all moved up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court basically said that the deal was unconstitutional. So there was a lot, and then they just shut it down. So just think about it in terms of not only money lost, but also time lost. So if you are a mining company, just, looking, where you could find, the next big thing like that, you're probably going to be a little bit cautious, a little bit more cautious than you normally are. And the stories, and it's not the only story, right? So I also had a bunch of things happening in Chile and Peru, which together account for around 40% of the world's copper production. So, and you also had a bunch of mines that were shut down in those countries, and they are responsible for a big chunk of global copper supply. And, as an investor, you look at those things and, like Doug Casey likes to say, who would just go through all that trouble, No one with any sense, really. So, yeah, there you have it.
Well, Lau, thanks for joining us today. If our audience wants more of your commentary, where can they go to?
They should go to crisisinvesting.com.
Okay. Well, Lau,
yeah.
And on social media, are you on Twitter or Instagram or Reddit or Truth Social or Rumble?
Well, we are on YouTube. You can find Doug does his podcasts with Matt Smith. They do those twice a week, and people can find those just by searching for Doug's Take. And so we also upload those on our page. And like I said, Doug does those usually twice a week. So yeah.
All right. Well, Lau, thanks for hopping on here today, and we'll be watching the copper market closely, and hopefully you'll come back on in the future to update us as we continue to see more, we'll say, friction play out in the global copper market.
Absolutely. It will be very interesting to see where this whole situation is a couple of years from now. And it will be a pleasure. And thank you for having me.
All right, everybody. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this interview, please smash that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Also, let me know what you think in the comment section. Thanks, everyone.